Good morning, evening, afternoon, whatever time it is when you're watching this. Welcome to Rabuni Catholic Community, where all are welcome without question. Today we celebrate the 25th Sunday in the Ordinary Time. Many of you probably remember that I did my pastoral internship when I was in the seminary in Central America, specifically in Honduras. I lived in the capital city, Tegucigalpa, which, if you want to call it a city, the poverty was palatable. It was just unbelievable. But one of the things that I remember is driving through the countryside. The countryside there is beautiful. Actually, the national tree of Honduras is the pine tree. Who would think? I thought it'd be the palm tree or something like that. But the pine tree. So lots of pine trees on the mountains and hills and stuff like that. But what I would see are these beautiful farms, pineapple farms and different crops that are grown. And these beautiful dole trucks, semi trucks, to pick up that produce. But then I would go to the market because I lived with the people. I wasn't in a hotel or anything like that, which makes a huge difference when you're visiting a country. Don't go to a hotel. Live with a family. It's a completely different experience. But anyways, when we would go to the market, all this beautiful produce that I saw on the farm fields and the hills they terrace was not in the market. And I asked somebody one time, I said, "Where's all this beautiful protest?" And they looked at me and they said, "It goes north to the United States and Canada. And we get the scraps." And literally, they look like scraps. The produce in the market was scraps of meat hung on a fence, bananas that were brown, tomatoes that looked like they had begun to rot. This was produce that Kroger would not have on their shelves. And that struck me, that basically this person said they get the leftovers, even though they are the ones harvesting all of that beautiful produce that we get. Honduras was and probably still is full of large landowners, and they run the peasants. The peasants are the workers, and they're paid very little. They live in squalid conditions. Some of the friars that I was with in community, I was a Franciscan at the time, they would preach against the landowners and how unfair and how unjust that was and how they treated the peasants. And the peasants were powerless, and they would try to organize the peasants. Several of our friars were killed, were murdered because of what they would say about the landowners. Landowners didn't like that at all. Recently, I was on retreat out in California in San Luis Obispo at my friend Daniel's monastery. I just got back a couple of days ago, and we drove through the Salinas Valley, which in the United States is considered the kind of the bread basket of the United States, the produce basket of the United States. Again, in the Salinas Valley, which is absolutely huge. If you've ever been there, it's this huge valley between two mountain ranges. And it goes on for miles and miles. Again, beautiful produce that we benefit from. But then you see in the fields these peasants, or what we would call immigrants, most probably, many of whom probably are not legally here. You you see these huge agricultural farms and agricultural produce stations, and then you see the squalid conditions in which these peasants live. And it seems so unjust and so unfair. One of the reasons why I talk about that is I want you to listen again to the first reading. From the prophet Amos, "Hear this, you who trample upon the needy and destroy the poor of the land. When will the noon moon be over, you ask, that we may sell our grain, and the Sabbath that we may display the wheat? We will diminish the ephah, add to the shekel, and fix our scales for cheating. We will buy the lowly for silver, even the refuse of the wheat we will sell. The Lord has sworn by the pride of Jacob, never will I forget a thing that they have done." It's pretty powerful language and a pretty powerful call for justice for us. The world, does this sound familiar? I mean, this was written centuries ago. And it's still happening, perhaps even more than it was happening back then. The world is full of greed. It is full of greed. There are the haves and the have-nots. The richer seem to be getting richer. The poorer seem to be getting poorer. And I just question this. Has trickle-down economics really worked? I don't know that it has for those who are poor. I've said it before and I will say it again. I think everyone in a first world country should be required to spend time in a third world country as part of our education, our educational system, but not staying in a hotel or a cruise ship or something like that, but with the people. I guarantee you it is life-changing. It is life-changing. I remember when I arrived in Honduras, the neighborhood didn't seem that bad around the airport, but the friars looked at me and they said, "This neighborhood doesn't look too bad, but it ain't our neighborhood." And when we drove to our neighborhood, it was filled with tin shacks, no electricity, no running water, things that I absolutely took for granted. And then you add the smells, because the sewage, people would just open their windows and throw the garbage out on the street. And the pigs and the cows and stuff like that would come and eat some of that up. It is a life-changing experience. For me, after a week in Honduras, I literally became paralyzed. I was so tired that I could not finish my Sunday duties in going to these different aldeas, these different villages, and having Mass. Because I was so paralyzed at the poverty that I was seeing. And here I was from the first world, having all these benefits that I never realized I had. And here are these people living the way they are. And I kept thinking, what can I do? What can I do? And I felt paralyzed by this system which kept those people down, as it says in that first reading from Amos. I remember when I came back home, and I literally kissed the ground once I got off the plane back in the United States. The next thing I did was took a hot shower. What a delight to take a hot shower instead of a cold shower. I delighted in good food again, that good produce of their land. I delighted in having electricity, being able to just turn a lamp on that I took for granted. I delighted in having a floor that I previously took for granted. I delighted in having hot water that I previously took for granted. I delighted in having air conditioning that I previously took for granted. And I delighted in having sewers, that I previously took for granted. So what can we do in this world of ours that is filled with such greed and that still attempts to hold the poor down? We can share what little we have. And as a combined entity, as a combined unit, the little we have to share can make a huge difference for people. Write our representatives is another thing we can do, to talk about the plight of the poor who are held down, to talk about just wages and good working conditions. Work for the changing of the systems that keep the poor down. There are systems in place that literally keep the poor down where they're at. Just like in Honduras, in our own country, there are those same systems. So where is our fundamental emphasis? And I'm preaching to myself because I have been remiss at this lately. Am I concerned with collecting money and wealth and sharing it? Is my concern with the poor? God's option is for the poor. Throughout the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures, God's option is for the poor. Is our option ultimately for the poor? I want to end by giving huge thanks to our outreach ministry for leading us and always keeping before our eyes the needs of the poor, and to this whole little community of Rabuni that gives in big ways, even though we're small. God bless you.